Right. All right, looks like that's most of the people coming in. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, welcome everyone again to SLAKE's webinar, Insight of Industry Insiders, How to Prepare for Your Career in Pharma and Biotech. Today, we're very pleased to be joined by a number of esteemed professionals from the industry, the pharma and biotech industries. So during this webinar, please note that it is being recorded. And please feel free to direct any questions about SLAKE to myself or to the other SLAKE speakers that you'll hear today. We apologize that some of our speakers had last-minute commitments and might not be able to join or maybe joining late. But again, we really want to thank the speakers who were able to join us on this Saturday. But again, please note the webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other social media. Next slide, please. Right, and I'll hand it over to Nipuna to give us the outline.
Thanks, Himasha. Hi, everyone. My name is Nipuna Veerasinghe, and I'm one of the organizers of this event. First of all, I would like to kindly ask audience to mute their microphones so that there are minimum disturbance during the meeting. And also, I would be appreciate if you can turn off your video so we can preserve our bandwidth. You can direct your question to panel via chat box available at the bottom of the screen at any time during the meeting. Next slide, please. To receive your e-certificate for participation, please complete the Google form available at the end of the meeting. Next, Uttara will briefly talk about what is SLAKE and what we do. Thanks. Uttara.
Yes, thank you, Nipuna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So yes, so SLAKE was founded to create more opportunities for professional connection between Sri Lankans in the United States and Sri Lanka, such as students who are studying in Sri Lanka, graduate students who came to the United States from Sri Lanka, young professionals based in the United States but of Sri Lankan heritage, and researchers and scholars interested in professional connections with Sri Lanka. In brief, SLAKE is creating a hub for sparking connections, stimulating collaborations, and sharing knowledge focused on the STEAM fields, which are science, technology, engineering, entrepreneurship, math, and medicine, in order to mitigate the impacts of brain drain and gain in the United States and Sri Lanka. SLAKE's mission is simple. I think you can see it on the slide right now. SLAKE's mission is to facilitate the exchange of knowledge between students, researchers, and professionals in the States and Sri Lanka in order to help provide scientific, evidence-based solutions and innovations addressing the STEAM fields and their related challenges. And SLAKE's vision is that we envision an active platform where fellow students, researchers, and professionals in Sri Lanka and the United States can virtually connect, share knowledge and opportunities, and contribute professional ideas to spark cross-country connections, stimulating collaborations, and helping mitigate the impacts of brain drain and brain gain. So to find out more about SLAKE, what you can do is follow the link that I'll be putting in the chat thread now. You can follow the link and you will be able to find out a bit more about SLAKE. And yes, I think you can see the leadership team now. So this is the leadership team of SLAKE. And I would like to thank all the members of the SLAKE team who are helping lead SLAKE's activities. And SLAKE's leadership team includes Sri Lankans and those of Sri Lankan heritage, as well as those based in the United States and Sri Lanka. Yohar, can we move to the next slide? Thank you. All right, so SLAKE's current activities. So we have quite a lot going on right now. And some of our main activities are catalyzing connections. And we introduce professionals of similar interests so that they can work together and collaborate. So far in this year, we've had over 40 successful connections. And also we have the SLAKE leadership team that works behind the scenes to make everything happen. And we have 250 plus members in our network who are interested in collaborating with the United States and Sri Lanka. And SLAKE is also looking forward to connecting with more Sri Lankan student associations in the United States. So if you are part of one of these associations, please email us if you are interested in working with SLAKE. And also we have a monthly newsletter that contains like updates, professional development resources, and catalyzing connection opportunities. We also have this like spotlight, which features a professional who is of Sri Lankan heritage or who is a Sri Lankan, and which embodies the SLAKE mission and vision. We also have the SLAKE webinar series, of which the goal is to promote bi-directional knowledge sharing and connection between both countries. Webinars are held every other month, and we also have a database that will be coming soon. You can follow our social media. Once again, I will post the link in the chat thread so that you can find out more about SLAKE by following our social media. Yes, that's it from me. Over to Malsha.
Hello, everyone. So we are going to take this opportunity to reveal you something that SLAKE is going to bring you starting this month. So we have been telling time to time that we are composing a ton of publications which are specifically featuring Sri Lankan authors and also articles about Sri Lanka. So we are finally done with compiling the publications repository. Anyone who wants to submit their articles, they still have time, and we will be accepting articles all throughout the time, starting onwards. And this is a little teaser telling you what is going to happen next Saturday by this time. Yohara, let's start. So, like we mentioned, save the date. It's going to be next Saturday, which is 5th of June, 2021, and we will be airing at the same time, 10 a.m. CDT. And on the next slide, we do have for both the events that we have. So we have a cultural exchange event coming up, and we have the publications repository launch. At the end of the event today, you will be receiving links to get and register for those events. So among the different ways that you can connect with SLAKE, you can become a member if you're not a member still, and Utsara will be putting the link on the chat. Also, SLAKE does bi-directional knowledge exchange. If you are a person who's looking for a connection that requires expertise from either USA or Sri Lankan side, tell us what you want and send us connection request, which would be the link in the chat box next time. And then there we have all these good things happening, and we tell you everything that happens through our newsletter. Subscribe to our newsletter. The newsletters roll out every month. And also you can follow us in Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and also Instagram, and get to know everything that happens in the minute that they happen.
All right, thank you, Malsha, and the rest of the SLAKE team for those introductions and that background to SLAKE. Now, before we launch into hearing from our fabulous speakers for today, we would just like to see who is in the audience and take a quick moment to meet our audience members. So in a few seconds, you'll see a Zoom poll pop up on your screen. Utsara, if you're able to start the poll. We just want to ask you, what is your current position? And this will help us get an understanding of who is in our audience today. So we'll just give it a few seconds for responses to come in. And again, for all SLAKE events, everyone is welcome, whether you're in the US, Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan, of Sri Lankan heritage, or just interested in the topic. Everyone is welcome from anywhere. Most of our events are virtual, so we welcome everyone who's able to join. All right. Well, it looks like responses are coming in. So we have a majority of undergraduates in our audience, which is fantastic, as well as a number of master's students, doctoral students, and postdocs, and quite a few researchers and professionals as well, including industry professionals who we welcome to also share any thoughts in the chat box. But if at any time during this webinar you have questions about an acronym, a location, or anything like that, feel free to put it in the chat box. All right, with that, we can move to the next slide, and Nipuna will introduce our guest speakers.
Thanks, Nimasha. First of all, on behalf of SLAKE, I would like to welcome our speakers and thank them for their participation in the event. To start the discussion, I would like to ask our speakers to introduce themselves by stating their name, their current location, and their position and their education background. Thanks. We can start with, I think, Dr. Jerry Kospia. I think you're mute.
Okay, there we go. So I would like to thank the organizers and the participants for attending this morning. My name is Jerry Kosmeter. I have a PhD in synthetic organic chemistry. I currently work at Roche Tissue Diagnostics in Tucson, Arizona as a senior director for the chemistry area. So the type of work we do is developing new chemistries for cancer detection, primarily in tissue. And we are part of a broader group in Roche, which is tying diagnostics to therapeutics. So one of the areas that we really are interested in is ensuring that we are having the most sensitive detection for our patients. And you might know some of the other products that Roche do, which are diabetes care, as well as most recently therapeutics and diagnostics for COVID-19.
Thanks, Jerry. And next, I would like to ask Dr. Nirodhini Srivastava to introduce herself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I couldn't unmute myself. Sorry about that. So hi, everybody. So my name is Nirodhini. I am currently located in Boston, Massachusetts. I am a principal scientist in Remix Therapeutics, leading a drug discovery small molecule screening group. I did my undergrads back in Sri Lanka and moved here for my PhD and transitioned to industry, into big pharma first and then into biotech company recently. So happy to share my insights with everybody.
Thank you. And next, I would like to ask Dr. Yamina Burchichi to introduce herself. I hope I pronounced her name correctly.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much, Nipuna. Thank you everyone for being here today. I'm really grateful for the invitation. So my name is Yamina Burchichi. I have a PhD in biochemistry that was followed by a couple of years in academia as a postdoc, and as a postdoc also not in industry, but in government, followed by a career in industry. And I'm currently wearing two hats. So it's a solution expert at AppChem on the slide, but I actually wear another hat. So I do work at AppChem as a account manager. So I work on the business and marketing side of science, and I serve customers with consumables, and I'm their liaison when around any products that are on the catalog at Abcam. But the other hat I wear, actually, and Nipuna, you know this already, is that in 2020, in March, I founded Dr. GPCR. My background is in GPCRs, which is short for G protein coupled receptors. Some of you know what they are, but basically you can see, smell, and taste thanks to GPCRs. And with Dr. GPCR, I created multiple opportunities, including a podcast, a newsletter, virtual cafes, which are monthly webinars based about science talks. But also we've organized a yearly summit where we had multiple talks, 30 talks last year and 400 attendees. So basically all of this to say that wearing those two hats allows me to use my scientific skills, my communication skills, and I'm currently developing my business skills at Abcam. And thank you again for coming here today.
Thank you, Dr. Yamina Bershish. And from here on, Nimasha will continue the discussion. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Nipuna, and thank you to all of our speakers again for giving us your time on this Saturday. We look forward to hearing so much more with the coming questions. So as was mentioned, my name is Nimasha Fernando. I'm co-founder and co-director of SLAKE, Sri Lankan American Knowledge Exchange. And I'll just be moderating our Q&A and our discussion for today. So to get started, we have 2 questions prepared for our speakers. Then after that, we welcome our audience members to submit questions in the chat box. You can send them directly to myself or to Malsha or one of the other SLAKE members that you heard speak. And we'll move into questions from the audience after hearing some more background from our speakers. So if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, the first question we would like to ask all of our speakers is, what was your path from completing your PhD to entering industry? And if you could tell us about some of the skills and experience from graduate school specifically that helped you enter industry, such as postdoctoral programs, networking opportunities, conferences you may have presented at, that would be fantastic as well. So I'll open it up to our speakers, whoever would like to go first.
Sure. So I can get started. I did my PhD in Ohio State, and then definitely, coming from Sri Lanka, I did my bachelor's in Sri Lanka, and I specialized in botany, right, back in University of Colombo. And then coming to US, my PhD was in plant, molecular, and cellular biology. So there I learned, it was mostly biochemistry and molecular biology, right? So I gained my skill set in biochemistry, doing a lot of protein-protein interaction work, right? A lot of really understanding the interactome, what all the proteins interact with. But this was in plant-based as well, right? So the techniques, skill set-wise, the techniques are the same, right? That you apply for different model organisms. So after during my PhD, I did attend a lot of conferences. I would say networking is key, right? As a graduate student, if you could do an internship or co-ops or undergrads co-ops, right? So those things really help into stepping into industry, because one of the important things is they need to know who you are, right? When you want to get your foot into industry. So any networking, if you want to do internships, co-ops, these are good ways of introducing yourself to other people in industry. So after my PhD, I moved to Boston. So from Ohio, I moved to Boston, and there I shift my field from plant sciences into more drug discovery and human work, right? So that was, for me, anybody who's in the audience who's in plant sciences and in thinking of a career going into drug discovery, it wasn't a hard transition at all, because your skill set, the experimental skill set that you're using in any research organism is the same, right? So for me, coming into transitioning from plant to human biology, and then moving on straight without really having any difficulties, that was I think something that I am very proud of, as well as it's something that it's easy to do. There's no, you don't have to think twice if you want to move into drug discovery or impacting patients' lives, right? From what your skill set that you learn even in plant sciences, you can be applied. Then from there, my postdoc, I was in my postdoc for 3 years in Boston University School of Medicine. And then at that point, after 3 years of my postdoc is where I moved into industry. Right. So in terms of skills, definitely the expertise that you bring in as a researcher, right, will lead you into as a good stepping stone into industry. And definitely, yes, network helps. Yeah. Yeah, so and from there onwards, I think I guess this we'll talk more about later on as well. So from my postdoc to I joined Merck Pharmaceuticals, right, in US and Canada. Merck and Company in outside US is called MSD, right? It's a big pharmaceutical company. I joined there as a biochemist. So definitely they hired me for my biochemistry experience, right? And then after 5 years of being at Merck in a big pharmaceutical company, I wanted to also experience a biotech. And so 2 months ago, I moved to Remix Therapeutics.
Thank you so much for sharing that path and how you moved from the PhD straight into industry. And made that transition so successfully. But would love to hear more about kind of the drug discovery and impacting patients' lives in the coming questions. Mm-hmm. But would one of our other speakers like to go next?
Sure, I can add to that. So I started my bachelor's degree in chemistry at Florida Tech. One of the interesting things I was able to do very early on was get into undergrad research. So I talked to some of the professors that I saw were doing some pretty interesting work during my first year, and they invited me to work in their lab. And in doing so, I learned a lot of very key skills that allowed me to actually really succeed in my later courses. So for example, when I took organic chemistry and analytical chemistry, they have these lab courses. And because of the things I had learned, some of the advanced techniques, I was able to successfully navigate those much more than I would have if not. Also from that, I was able to get some publications. So it really helped get my name out there, that I was somebody that had some skills as well as was working in a diversity of fields. Of course, from that point, I was encouraged to do my graduate studies. So I did my PhD in synthetic organic chemistry at the University of Illinois in Chicago. There in the chemistry department, we were also aligned with our medical college, which allowed me to then do much more diverse research. So I started doing drug discovery using plant sources as a way to see if we could find specific compounds that could affect the different precursors and post-carcinogenesis pathways. What was really great about that is it required a very high degree of collaboration. So it wasn't just that your skills in chemistry were important, but it was also aligning with folks in the biology and also organizing things. We had collaborators across the world and just about every country, and we would solicit samples of plants from their areas, do various screening programs, and then if we found hits, we would collaborate with them to get more of the material and do animal studies with those. And so in being a new graduate student, it really opened up my eyes to not just the networking part of it, but really the collaboration and understanding that, in many cases we were all talking about the same thing, but we were using our own terminology and language to describe things. And being able to bridge across all those different areas allowed us to find some pretty cool things that could not happen if we tried individually to do this. So that was one of the things that really encouraged me. After I graduated with my PhD, I went over to the College of Pharmacy to actually teach and start a research group as a research assistant professor. And it was during that time that I was able to learn that, you have to balance the personnel part, being able to mentor students, to work collaboratively across not just other professors, but also to work across industry. And that was when I first started working with some folks at Monsanto/Pharmacia, where we started using some of our plant-based detection and discovery techniques to look at areas in women's health as well as cancer. Those interactions were paying off spectacularly until Pharmacia bought out Monsanto and shut that program down. But at that point, I started looking around for industry. It was actually at an American Chemical Society conference that I ran into some folks that were doing some interesting drug discovery work using combinatorial chemistry in Tucson. And so I interviewed with them, and they invited me to come work for their company. So I moved to Tucson, and I worked there for almost a year. But unfortunately, that company also had some turnover. And in biotech, people should realize, there's a lot of instability. So you get to learn a lot of things, but at the same time, your company may be looking in different directions. They're usually running on what's called venture capital. And sometimes that runs out and they don't have a path forward, and then the company folds. So unfortunately, I lost my job at that point in time, but was great that Ventana Medical Systems in Tucson had just started a new facility and had just started a chemistry department. So I was their first chemistry hire at the time. And over time, I grew my position by networking, working collaboratively across very diverse departments, everything from quality and regulatory, our medical offices, being able to bring people together and try to network as well as collaborate so that you could bring value where, again, one individual can't do it or an individual department can't do it. And so over the years, I've been promoted into different positions to where I sit today, where I now head up the chemistry for tissue diagnostics. And shortly I'll become part of a more global R&D where I'll have much more reach, where I will have colleagues that will be coming from Switzerland, China, South Africa, Germany, to come together to bring additional value for patients.
Thank you, Dr. Kosmeter. Definitely, I think a lot of points you said resonated well, and I'm sure resonated with our audience. Speaking to the experience as an undergraduate, the value of lab courses and publications, but also speaking about multidisciplinary collaborations and interdisciplinary collaborations, and bridging those disciplinary divides, and something we'd love to hear more about with future questions. But I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Yamina to tell us more.
Thank you so much. I was trying to unmute myself and then Jerry, you hopped on, but thank you again for having me today. I'm really excited to talk to all of you. So to take a step back from my brief introduction, I completed a master's and a PhD degree in Canada, in Montreal, at the University of Montreal. And at the time, the master's was a stepping stone towards the PhD. And I'm bringing this up because you mentioned, Nimasha, that we have a lot of undergraduate, master's, and PhD students. I know the system is different here in the US, but basically back in the day when I had the opportunity as an undergrad to work in a lab for a summer. And I really loved that experience, loved the fact that it was a brand new lab and we didn't have enough pipettes. We had to put our own tips into the boxes. And at some point we didn't even have ATP. So we had to come up and find a buffer that had some ATP to run some of our molecular biology experiments. And that gave me the motivation to stay and work in the lab and build up that team. I worked very closely with my PI. I stayed for a master's and then I went into my PhD. But once I started my master's, I really thought carefully whether I wanted to pursue a PhD or not. And at the time, I decided that I loved it too much. I loved being in the lab. I loved working with collaborators. We had a fantastic collaboration going on with another lab at the university with a world-renowned researcher, but we also had collaborations with people in Europe. And that allowed me to interact with many people, go to many different conferences, present my work, as a poster, in a form of a poster, but also I was able to give talks. And that was one of the most fun experiences I had doing a master's and a PhD. And after my PhD at the University of Montreal, as I mentioned, the question was, what do I do? And this was about 10 years ago. And to be honest, retrospectively, I think I should have thought more carefully about what I wanted to do. I was very much invested in the science, very much invested in the work. And I'm glad that we're here today because people can hear my story and perhaps ask themselves important questions, including where do I want to take my career? What makes me happy? And what do I want to be doing every day, Monday to Friday? And the answer to me at the time was I want to do a postdoc outside of Canada. And that led me to a postdoc at the Rockefeller University. I spent 5 years at Rockefeller. And again, at the end of the 5 years, I found myself in the same position of, the funding was running out and maybe I should be thinking about what I want to do. And thanks to my networking skills, I was introduced to a scientist at NIH through a collaborator with whom we've been working. And I just wanted to take a pause and really highlight the story behind that collaboration. I was at a conference and I was presenting a poster and someone stopped at my poster. We started talking and that person said, oh, wait a minute, my roommate actually would be very interested in seeing your poster. So I met the roommate, we became collaborators, and this roommate's PI is the person who introduced me to my next lab head at NIH. And I spent about 3 years at NIH, working in the same field throughout the entire time from the minute I stepped into the lab, working on GPCRs. And in 2019, actually 2017, I decided that I wanted to explore other career opportunities. I loved working in the lab, but not enough. I felt like I went around, I learned all the techniques I was interested in, but I needed more. And that's when I started preparing to go into industry. And everyone has mentioned, networking and working with people and, being out there. And that's what I started to do. First thing what I did is figure out what made me happy, what kind of work I was interested in doing. And then I made sure that I made a list of all of my connections. And I always try to reach out to people and ask them for their opinion. Like we're doing today, we're 3 speakers, and learning from other people's experiences to me was very important in deciding what next. And while at NIH, I was also working towards getting my green card, which also for foreigners, it's a deal breaker sometimes, and it's hard to get. The process is really stressful, and it also determines where your next career might be. So then in 2019, I started looking for jobs. I made sure that my LinkedIn looked great. I made sure that, my online presence was really professional. And I was contacted by a recruiter who said, hey, I'm working with a small biotech. They're venture firm backed. They have the funds. Are you interested in interviewing? And sure enough, in 6 weeks, I was hired at that biotech company. So I moved from Maryland to the Boston area. And it was a great experience. We were working on machine learning and discovering novel therapeutics using machine learning, protein therapeutics. And this lasted about a year. And as Jerry mentioned, the biotech world is a fast pace and things change really quickly. So I did lose my job in 2020 as COVID was hitting. And that was it was a blessing in disguise. It's never fun to be told, well, thank you, but we're changing directions, or there's a change in your employment status. But that led me to, again, reevaluate my options and realize that this was the time for me to step away from the lab work and go more into a business direction. And that's where I started looking for positions that were more business focused, more marketing focused. And at the same time, as I mentioned previously, I founded Dr. GPCR, which the goal of Dr. GPCR is really to bring everyone who works in the field under the same umbrella in the spirit of collaboration, so that we can advance drug discovery against these targets. For those of you who don't know, about 50% of all available drugs target GPCRs. As I mentioned, you can see, smell, and taste thanks to GPCRs, but GPCRs control so many more events in the body physiologically, but also they're important in cancer, they're important in development. And that's kind of my passion. And taking the path towards going into more of a business-based job hunt, and at the same time working on building Dr. GPCR, allowed me to realize that actually I like talking to people. And my point by telling you this story is both of the guests also talked about networking. Founding Dr. GPCR and coming up with the podcast, the Dr. GPCR podcast, allowed me to invite guests to the podcast who either are Nobel laureates. I had guests who are CEOs, who are CSOs of companies. I have VPs of large biopharma companies. And it allowed me to network with people who are way ahead in their careers. And it's a good opportunity to reach out to these people and invite them in. So we went from 0 followers to almost 3,000 followers across all our social media platforms. And I will stop here.
No, thank you so much for that. I think it's really interesting to hear, especially about some of these transitions in careers, whether voluntary or involuntary, and to think through some of those decision points. But also hearing how for you, a master's was really a stepping stone over to a PhD, it sounds like, but also just that early love for the lab environment and research, but also thinking at different points along the way, what do I want to do next and what's going to make me happy? And how do I learn from others and network to really take the next steps forward? So all points we would love to expand on in the coming question. But with that, Yohara, could we please go to the next slide? So building off what our speakers have already shared, we'd like to present or pose the next question. What went well in the career paths that you told us about? Would you recommend that others do anything differently? And I think when talking about your career paths and your current position, recognizing that we have some students and early career professionals in the audience, if you could just define your current field in maybe 1 or 2 sentences, just for any students or early career professionals who have not yet heard about your specific area of expertise. But would love to hear more about how you made those different decisions in your career path, especially for those who have maybe come to the US from Sri Lanka or another country for studies or for jobs, but also what impact questions like, what do I do next? Or what makes me happy? Or what impacts do I want to have on people? How some of those questions might have impacted your career choices. So with that, I'll open it up for speakers. Feel free to add anything you think is important for our audience to know.
Sis, I can go first. So thinking about my career, as I mentioned before, right? So right now I'm in drug discovery, right? I'm leading a small molecule screening group in Premix Therapeutics. I think I have taken few field changes, right? So coming from being a botanist from Sri Lanka, right? Studying plant sciences, coming to US, and then still doing my PhD in plant organisms. Moving to Boston, then realizing there wasn't much of plant labs that was funded, and then moving on to more of doing epigenetics and cell cycle regulation at Boston University School of Medicine. So that transition was, like Yamina mentioned, what do I want to do? Right? What do I want to do hereafter? I really wanted to impact patients' lives, right? And so I wanted to move into more of a drug discovery program. But then for me, the transition was from plant sciences. I sort of had to take it in stages, right? from plant sciences going into epigenetic cell cycle, really going into hands-on culturing human cells, getting used to that setting, right? And then from there, after 3 years of being in the lab, doing my postdoc, having the publications, reaching out to people, really gaining the visibility, right? And then the next step was, okay, I'm doing my postdoc, what do I want to do? Do I stay in academia, right? Do I want to move into industry, right? At that point, for me, I made a decision to move on to industry again because I wanted to impact, I wanted to see, use my knowledge and impact patients' lives, right? So that point, I was determined that I wanted to move to industry. But of course, I was nervous. Okay, I have a plant background. What do I do? Is the big pharma going to take me, right? So luckily, when I was getting ready to move on, I was done with my publications in the lab, and I wanted to move on. A proteomics team from Merck reached out. This was actually a contractor position, right? So they reached out for a contractor position. And at that point I was thinking, what do I do? Should I just not take the contractor position? Should I apply first to industry as a full-time position, right? Then what I really admired was that I could, in a situation like that, I can definitely go in as a contractor and then get hired as a full-time employee, right? Once so that's what I did. I went as a contractor, right? I had a phone interview. Just after the interview, they offered me the contractor position. Of course, being a contractor, you're not fully employed by the company, right? You're coming from a third party, through another agency. So, but it's a really good stepping stone, right? And if you get your foot into the industry, that's where, so I joined Merck as a proteomics scientist, and within 10 months, I was hired as a full-time researcher, right? So that is, if I started applying, I probably wouldn't have applied to Merck, right? Because you are applying to a big pharmaceutical company. And I always had this back of my head, I'm a botanist, right? I am now stepping into drug discovery, but honestly, that was not a factor at all, right? You bring in your skill set, you bring in who you are, your integrity, you are a responsible scientist, right? Your adaptability, if you can move from plant to human, and I've gone to even yeast systems, right? Bacterial systems. So your adaptability and with the changing goals, how you work towards your common goal, the company's goal, right? That's what's needed. So I think having a vast skill set, having a diverse background, all these will help you, right? They're not, it's in favor of you, right? So I stepped into Merck. Within 10 months, I was hired as a full-time employee there. Then after 5 years within Merck, right? What went well in my career path? If I think about my 5 years at Merck, right? Definitely having that broad skill set, having adaptability, like you can change from one thing to other very fast with the changing goals, helped me a lot, right? Because of that, I was given a lot of opportunities, right? That I could take and lead things, right? I introduced new workflows to my department. I was able to bring in a different angle of thinking from some other people, right? Because you're coming from a vast background, sort of. So I think that helped me a lot in my career. Definitely with opportunities comes visibility, right? So you get to own what you do, you get your visibility to your higher leadership, right? So those things, I think, last 5 years in pharma, that really helped me in my career path, right? So at the end of my 5 years, I've expanded my skill set. I've collaborated with many teams within Merck, right? Well, when you're in the company, you are definitely collaborating with all the other teams, right? So I've done many like oncology, neurosciences, many aspects of drug discovery. And you work with chemists, you work with bioinformatics, you work with genetics departments, right? So you are collaborating, you're expanding, you're definitely this kind of you own your thing and you're moving forward. It helps you in positioning yourself in the company, pretty much, right? So initially, I would say you need to work hard, right? It's you're working hard, your integrity, your science, your strong background, your science background, right, is going to help you for people to know who you are, what you're bringing in, right? To trust you, right? Your integrity, your data integrity, right? You're to trust you, you earn that trust as well. And then at the same time, you're bringing in your leadership skills, right? So as a scientist, both these are important, not just doing the science in bench, right? Of course, that is an absolutely necessary skill set when you're in the field, but at the same time, you need to think of you're doing you are gaining experience, you are gaining your skill set. At the same time, you need to think about your career path, leadership skills, right? So one other thing I think really helped me from coming from Sri Lanka to here is also when you don't know something, don't be afraid to say you don't know, right? Honesty, truth, transparency matters, right? So, and there's always these people that are within the company. Once you step into a company, that the company runs, it's a collaborated unit, right? So everybody is depending on each other. So reaching out, learning from others is definitely is going to help you. Definitely helped me in my career path. Yeah, and then once you set yourself and when you know your direction, I would say you work hard, but you also work smart, right? So because you have, I think Yamina, you also mentioned like it's every time you expand your skill set, you stop and think what you want to do next, right? So this definitely, that is where you work smart as well, right? You bring in what you want, collaborations, what direction you're going, right? It's not just working hard, it's working hard plus working smart, right? So I think, yeah, so I am a scientist, I think, who likes to, I love doing science, I work hard, right? But at the same time, I think always pausing to think, what do you want to do next in your career? Because as we all know, the time is flying, and you can definitely get in, time goes by very fast, and you get really involved into doing the work, but you got to stop and think, what do you want to do next always? And that's where after 5 years being at Merck, I really enjoyed my work at Merck. I really enjoyed my colleagues, my collaborations, right? But then it became after 5 years, I was, what do I want to do next? I want to learn biotech. What it is feel like, the fast-paced environment, right? I know it's risky, as both Yamina and Sherry mentioned things, but it's very different coming from a big pharma to a biotech. My experience is I think I'm expanding my experience, I would say, because the common goal is the same, right? It's drug discovery to impact patients' lives, but the setting is very different from big pharma to biotech. Biotech is very fast-paced, right?
Yeah. No, thank you, Dr. Nido. I think that's you've made some fantastic points, and I think also fantastic for our audience to hear from someone who's made that transition from Sri Lanka over to the US into industry. But I think your point also that you wanted to do something that wanted to make an impact on patients' lives is really something inspirational. And I think something that will resonate well with a number of our students and early career professionals in the audience, making sure they build that question of, what impacts do I want to make on people's lives into their thinkings, but also your points on bringing your integrity and your science and your honesty and adaptability and leadership skills to a company to help contribute towards their common goal, and working hard, but also working smart. I think fantastic points that I'm sure our attendees will find very valuable. But I want to also give our other speakers some time to address this question. What went well in your career path? Would you have any recommendations for our audience? And feel free to add in anything.
Jerry,
Yes, I guess so. Okay, thanks. Just briefly, there were three, I think, areas that really were kind of those key points in my career. The first one, I think, is very similar to, I think, everyone. What do I want to do with my life? I'm a very hands-on person. I really love serving people. I love helping people. And I had to make a decision as to, was I going to stay with my undergrad or was I going to get a doctorate? And one of the things I realized is to be able to have the impact and the reach that I wanted to do, I really needed to get that advanced degree. And I was told by some folks that, you can either be somebody who's told what to do, or you can be the person that's leading what gets done. And so getting the PhD was that first step in allowing me to do that. And just like with Nira, being able to say, you also have to have that kind of attitude of, I'm going to lead by example. I'm going to be the one that does this and bring other folks along with. My second point is you really need to find mentors, people who are either doing things that you want to do, or maybe just their attitude, what they may not be working in your field, but they're doing something that's pretty unique and people recognize that. And I got to say, along the way, each of us are touched by friends and family, teachers and other folks. Make sure you're reaching out to those people and talking to them. And you'd be surprised. None of us got to where we are alone. And we really would like to help others, like the three speakers you see here today. So in your areas, look for people who are doing things that you would like to do, or to have a certain skill or way of speaking in public that you can talk to them and get some advice on how to do that. And I say I've had some incredible mentors along the way that even to this day, they still help me, even though many of them are in academia or government, they still give me little tidbits of information and help on making me a more effective scientist, a more effective leader within my organization. And then I'd like to say thirdly, that once I was in this industry, there was a couple of paths that I could choose. I could either be, a scientist where I could rise up to be a principal scientist or a fellow in our company, or I could become a manager. And it was a very difficult decision for me kind of mid-career because I love the science. I'm a hands-on person. I love the work. I love the ability to take ideas and turn them into concrete products. But I also realized that my impact could be broader if I became a manager. So I sacrificed my ability to be at the bench, which I don't do today, but I was able to now influence many people directly as part of my team, as well as to influence folks that are outside my team in other departments and other companies and key leaders across the world. And so for me, it was a good choice to do that. And it actually helped bring out something that, I said at the beginning, my vision of myself was to help people. And I want you all to realize that teachers are one of those best leaders too. They're not there to do a job. They're there to enable others to be better. And in that case, it was allowing me to still be a good teacher, still being able to be the person that can bring out the best in my own employees, but also in people across the world.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I think excellent points there as well. And building off of our earlier speakers, really, I think the point that resonates is thinking about what impact you wanted to make. And it sounds like as part of your career path, that involves thinking about managerial roles and some of those leadership roles, and maybe sacrificing some time at the bench. But again, thinking, impact would be broader as a manager and in those roles. But also, I think your points about mentorship and teachers and learning from others are things that our other speakers have touched on as well. And the importance of finding, whether it's a supervisor or a teacher or a professor or someone who has skills that you admire, and reaching out for support, but also finding these people who are going to enrich you and empower you to do better and to go forth in your career. And Dr. Yamina, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Thank you. Thank you both, Nero and Jerry. I think you both made some fantastic points. I loved your point about working hard and working smart, Nero. I think you have to learn when you have to work hard, and sometimes you have to prioritize and learn when to work smart. And as a leader, Jerry, and both of you actually, when you have people who work for you, you have to let them embrace the work and do the work. And Jerry, I loved the way you were referring to, taking care of the people who actually do the work. And that's what a leader does, and that's just fantastic. The other point I really, really loved hearing about is, making that decision on where do you want to go? What do you want to be? And going back to the question that says what went well in your career path, I try to think about the bad or the not so good decisions that I make as lessons learned and not as failures. It's hard. It's hard. When I think about myself, when I got my PhD, in my mind, it was black and white. You either are successful by becoming something or you're just a failure. And the truth to that 10 years later is that you have to make a decision on what makes you feel good. You have to find the job that is in harmony with your lifestyle, whether it's having a family, wanting to be outside, not working on weekends or doing things like that. And that the fact that you can have multiple careers, you can be good at multiple things. And just because you get, fired from a job doesn't mean that you're a failure. It's a great time to stop, think about what you want to do, and just get up and make something out of it. And I think that's very important to be conscious of when you're doing a PhD or when you're doing, research, because we're very much, I think we're all adrenaline driven and reward driven. Whenever you're at the bench, you're doing experiments and it doesn't work 99% of the time. But then we have this advantage as PhDs or as scientists that we can get up and then start all over again and do it. And I think you should use the same approach when it comes to your career and to your life. There's no such thing as mistakes in my mind. There's lessons learned. And it should all start with you by being introspective, finding out what you want to do. Both Jerry and Nero, you mentioned that you wanted to make an impact on human health, and you found your way to do it that is resonating well with your career, with your lifestyle. And those are very important things. And my way of contributing to the scientific world and my way of contributing to improving human health is, again, through Dr. GPCR. It also is somewhat through my work at AppCam, but my interactions directly with scientists from all over the world, whether they're in industry or in pharma, comes more around my little word that I created for myself. And we both talked about mentors. When I was a PhD student, I used to go to these career events, and the question was, we would always hear that, you have to find yourself a mentor. And I want to really go more deeper into that and say that it's not, the terms networking, mentorship, and finding mentors, everybody uses these terms. And to me, they were very difficult to put into action. So perhaps I want to bring some advice to that and share some experiences that I had. So finding a mentor, what does that mean? It means finding somebody in your network or somebody, in the world who has gone through most likely some of the difficulties that you've gone through. But how do you approach someone? You won't write them or, go on LinkedIn and say, hey, I want you to be my mentor. That's not the best approach to do it. People will say, well, I don't know you. So if I can offer some tangible advice, look at the people who are in your eyes very successful and you feel like they have careers that you might be interested in, and message them and tell them, you know, I looked at your profile. I think you've done some great things. I was hoping to connect with you. And if I, you know, you can ask people and ask them, do you have 5 minutes to tell me more about your career? Like what we're doing today. And people in general, 99% of them will say, well, of course, they like to talk about themselves. And you can create that connection. They won't be directly, you know, it's not a question as what do you want to be my mentor or not, but you will develop that relationship. You will be able to reach out to them. You can, oftentimes people use the phrase, you know, add value. Adding value, it just means being human and being nice and friendly to someone. And building relationships takes time. Nero, you had mentioned, you know, about scientific integrity and showing that, you know, people getting to trust you based on the fact that you do your work well and the data is the data. And I think that can also be taken into the context of forging relationships with people. And it takes time. It is completely feasible. And within a year, again, drawing from my experience, within a year, starting the podcast and talking to people, I got to a point where people reach out to me and they say, well, I love what you're doing. And these people are in a totally different universe. I interviewed a Nobel laureate in December for my podcast, and they reached out to me and they said, we'd love to come on your podcast because we love what you're doing. And initially my intention was just to interview scientists in a field that I'm passionate about. That's it. And that led me to being able to talk to people at different levels, different companies. And I think that's just one way of going about it. Each and every person here today can think about what makes them happy and how they can open up to the world and increase their connections and go into those relationships in the spirit of collaboration, into being genuinely interested in what the other person is doing, being genuinely interested in helping them in any way you can, by, for example, sending them an article that you thought might be interesting to them. And I think that takes time, but that's the best and the richest way to forge these relationships. And you will find the mentor, you will find that connection. Nero, you had mentioned, you know, getting connections in industry and having sponsors and people who support you. And I think that's one way of getting those connections and moving on to an industry career. But just because you're an industry scientist today, that doesn't mean that in 5 years, you're going to be the same person. And reevaluate, and I'm just going to stop here.
No, thank you, Dr. Yamina. Definitely interesting to hear that points, you know, people are going to change and you need to constantly have those reevaluation points. And I think we've heard the other speakers speak about, you know, different pivot points in their career, just echoing that. But I think your sort of definitions, if you will, about a mentor is someone who has gone through similar difficulties as you might go through. And adding value just means being human and building those relationships and being genuinely interested in helping others. But also thinking about things that might not have gone as you would have wanted them. They're not mistakes, but as lessons learned. And I think some fantastic points, but also really actionable and tangible advice that I know is very valuable to our audience. But also just the points about being introspective and at some point creating your own world and getting up to make something out of it, the world that you want to put yourself in. So all fantastic points from our speakers, but one theme for all of our speakers has been something I think Dr. Yamina just touched on, finding a job that's in harmony with your lifestyle. But our speakers have also talked about collaboration and building relationships professionally, and just thinking about what different career decisions might mean in your own life, given potential instabilities in industry or companies, or the uncomfortableness of not knowing your next step. So we have about 10 or 12 minutes or so left for our speakers to share their valuable insights. We'd like to jump ahead a few slides. Johara, if we're able to go, and one more, there we go. Utsura, if you're able to launch this poll question, we would like to hear from our audience. We're so fortunate to have over 120 people still with us. We want to give our audience a time to select the question that our speakers should answer, likely our last question. But For our audience members, please select in the poll which questions you'd like our speakers to answer next. How do you manage your time between professional life and other commitments? How important is collaboration and teamwork in your job? Or what recommendations do you have for networking? Thinking about what our speakers have already shared and the definitions of networking they've given. But again, just really interesting hearing more about some of these soft skills and a little different than the questions around, you know, how do I get into a PhD program? But once you're there and you're a student and you've developed these hard skills or these lab skills, what else do you need to really think about? All right. So we see our votes coming in, and thank you for everyone who is still joining us. All right. Well, it looks like we have a very close tie between 44% of our audience asking, how do you manage your time between professional life and other commitments? And 48% of our audience asking or wanting to know about what recommendations do you have for networking? So with that, I think I'd like to open up to our speakers. If you're maybe able to first address any additional recommendations that you have for networking, in addition to what you've already shared with us, since that a good portion of our audience would like to know the answer about networking. But also if you have time to comment briefly on just how you manage your professional life and other commitments, if that's something you're comfortable touching on. It looks like almost half of our audience is interested in that question as well. So I'll open it up to our speakers, again, to feel anything that you're comfortable with and that you have not already covered in the next 10 minutes or so.
I'll go if you don't mind, Nero. You've been a champion at going first. So number one was, how do you manage your time between professional life and other commitments? You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I am always on the run. I have a family, I have a pet, I have Dr. GPCR, I have my full-time job, and I'm always working in some capacity. But I do have to stress the fact that you absolutely need to move, to eat well, and to sleep enough. That's very important. And as long as you're doing what you love, it's not difficult to, motivate yourself and sit down and do it. I love what I do. I always have a to-do list. I use different tools that I'm happy to share if you want to get in touch with me to organize myself. And I always try and figure out what is the most urgent and what is the work that I need to do that will bring me the most reward back. So basically, this is about organizing my time. And then what recommendations do you have for networking? Before you go out networking, make sure that your online presence is in order. Make sure that you have a beautifully crafted LinkedIn. You have a profile picture. The first thing someone will do when they reach out to you or you reach out to them is they're going to Google you because they want to know who you are, where do you come from. And I welcome everyone to connect with me on LinkedIn. I have 2 requests. Make sure that you add in a message and tell me where you've heard about me, because I get all these requests and sometimes I don't know who that person is. And make sure you have a properly curated LinkedIn profile. And that's, I think, one of the best ways to network. Be nice. Do not ask for a job right away. Make sure that you spell my name properly. That's something that I'm always afraid when I email somebody or write to someone is spelling their name improperly. That just drives me nuts when it happens to me, but I'm always very careful when I reach out to people. And, be courteous, be nice, and wait, add value by sending interesting articles, by saying something nice to that person. But first of all, make sure that your presence is impeccable online. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yamina. I think excellent points as always, but also I really appreciate those tangible points that before reaching out to you, or I suppose anyone else on LinkedIn for maybe some of those mentorship connections we talked about, making sure that one, you add that note where you heard of the person and that personal kind of connection, but 2, making sure your LinkedIn is properly order and that you're adding some element of value. And if anyone has concerns about their LinkedIn in the audience, we're happy from SLAKE to help support LinkedIn profiles and such. But also really love the point, if you love what you're doing, it's not going to be hard to sit down and get it done. But would love to hear from our other speakers, Dr. Jerry or Dr. Niro, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I agree with you, Amina, what you just said. I mean, LinkedIn is a key thing now, right? And then definitely not reach out to say, hey, do you have a job for me? That's not the way to go, because that is a really turn down. No, that's, you know, building, sort of giving, letting them know who you are first, right? It's just not your skill set, it's also your soft skills, right? You don't just, you need to approach in a way that the person would want to read and then connect with you. So very good points. The other thing I would say is if you're interested in, say, you're in an area and you there's a company that you want to sort of go and learn or step into that company, maybe see whether they want to meet for a coffee, right? If you're in the same vicinity, that's a really nice, good way of sort of starting your interactions and networking skills, because then they really get to see you. You're not a picture, you're not on paper, you are a person directly communicating, right? So you could speak, you could lead a conversation, you could, you know, these kind of things are important as well. So if you're in the same neighborhood, same city, just reach out to say, I would love to have a coffee with you. Do you have a few minutes for me, right? So that is, I think that's important as well. In terms of balancing professional life, I am a mom as well, so it is, it's always like priority, right? Of course, you want to have time for your kids, you want to have time for your family, right? That is definitely it's another human being that you are raising. So so that is an important thing. It's also always like priority. Is somebody else waiting for me right now? If so, I need to attend to it right now, right? So that it is hard. I'm not going to say it's easy, but you can do it. Yeah.
No, thank you, Dr. Niro, and especially appreciate your comments, thinking about family life and how those decisions, you know, are additional things to think about. And it is additional humans and additional people. And just thinking about how you prioritize people in your life, whether they are family or maybe different mentors, colleagues, professionals. I think that's something we're hearing from speakers today, just the value of prioritizing different tasks, but people. But also a great tip to add to Dr. Yamina's LinkedIn tips, you know, not messaging you have a job for me, but really showing you're a real human and you're genuinely interested in their professional environment and their trajectory. And Dr. Jerry, would love to hear your inputs as well.
So both, you know, Mina and Nira have just fantastic ideas about, you know, the networking and balancing your professional life. The only thing I can really add is, like, for me, from the beginning, even when I was a student, I made an idea about creating hard barriers between my personal life and my professional life, and making sure the people around me knew about it, you know, in a very, you know, firm but gentle way, to let people know that it's not okay to call me at 7 o'clock at night unless it's an emergency. You know, that emails aren't going to be responded to at midnight. You know, these are the types of things I've had to actually train my managers and my leadership to do, to say, that's not okay. And to be clear, in some cases, if you are in a situation where somebody is demanding that from you, maybe that's not the right place for you either. You know, finding the right fit, it's important for you to be able to have time for yourself, for your family, as well as then to be able to give your full attention to your job. And if you're mixing both, sometimes it can get a little skewed. So I would encourage you that as you're going through your career, you know, make sure that you prioritize what is important to you, you know, making sure your family is, and then ensuring that when you are at your job, whether student or being in industry, that then you are giving your full attention to that, and knowing that there will be exceptions, and that's okay. But really, you want to try to keep those separate as much as possible. In the case of networking, I can't emphasize enough what has already been said. Make sure your online presence is clean and crisp and professional. I will tell you that when people do reach out to me, or in some cases when they apply for jobs, we have very sophisticated tools to look what's out there. And if we see something troubling, we won't respond to it. So just make sure that you do have something that is very clear. I also encourage everyone else to reach out to me in LinkedIn. You can use, just search my name. Normally I provide a QR code, but I didn't get that done in advance. But certainly reach out to me. I'm happy to answer other questions, and folks that have specifics, about your own personal situation. I would imagine that all of us would be able to provide some level of advice, but really about getting mentors. It's about people who are close to you. So having something online is okay. I think that gives you something to start with, but really it's the folks that you can sit down and have a coffee with and talk about things that are not just about your professional career. Because the one thing is, if you are good with yourself and you're good with your family life, then you won't be able to turn your attention to your work life as well. And to be honest with you, I talk to a number of people, both who are above me at my same level and those that are below me. I have one-on-ones with folks, probably 20, 30 a week. And at that time, I get to talk about what's going on in your life. We can talk about what's going on in my life. And you always learn something. And even just talking it out really helps. And then maybe just to end with, be self-aware. Understand that you are an emotional human being. And there's some things that are triggers. There's some things that when you're stressed, you're going to say things or do things that are probably not the most appropriate. So just be careful about when you're interacting with folks. Make sure that you're really present in understanding what your situation is. As everyone said, don't ask for a job right away. Don't get really pushy about you need to help me with this. It's a relationship. Start out slow, get to know them, have them get to know you, and open up about something that you really want to learn about, whether it's something in your personal life in terms of a decision. Do I go to school for my advanced degree? Do I go into industry? Do I get a job? What do I want to do? Help those folks help you.
Thank you, Dr. Jerry. Fantastic points to add on and build on what our other speakers have said. And also really appreciate the advice for really putting up some hard barriers between personal and professional life, but also not just having that work-life balance that you keep for yourself, but also communicating those barriers, or not barriers, but just divisions to others in your life. So they know it's, what to expect of you at different times, and making that clear to others so they can also help you reinforce some of those standards and divisions that you've set for yourself. But thank you also for emphasizing again the value of having an online presence that is crisp and professional. And again, echoing some of our other speakers and building off of their points, the value of being self-aware, recognizing you are an emotional human, and these pieces maybe related to mental health and just balancing family life are also valuable. It's not only thinking about these professional skills, but also considering, what's happening in your home life and making sure those things are to your satisfaction. And that in turn will help with your work life as well. But building on, we're so grateful that all of our speakers have offered different ways to connect with them. Yohara, if you're able to go to the next slide. And the next. All right. So speaking of connections and building networks, this is exactly what SLAKE does. For speakers who have generously offered that SLAKE can put them in touch with those interested in connecting with them after the webinar, whether it's to discuss mentorship or potentially collaboration or additional advice, SLAKE has a connection process where we ask that anyone interested in contacting a speaker after the event fills out SLAKE's connection request form. You'll see this form coming up in your chat, and we'll also share it after the webinar. Attendees, please submit the SLAKE connection request form if you would like to connect with one of the speakers, if you're not reaching out to them already on LinkedIn, of course, then SLAKE will email you for more information. Again, we do not want to pose questions to our speakers such as, do you have a job at your company for me? But if you have a genuine professional interest in collaboration or mentorship, we're happy to accept those requests. From there, SLAKE will introduce you to the speaker by email and hopefully create more of a warm connection, again, to help with our virtual networking. Again, this is based on the speakers offering to share their information, and we make sure that any requests coming from our audience or our attendees do have a legitimate professional value. But SLAKE does this not only for webinar speakers, but other professionals as well throughout our events. And the aim here is really cross-country knowledge exchange and bi-directional collaboration, but all in the with SLAKE's mission and vision to connect, collaborate, and innovate. So that's briefly about our connection process, but I'll hand it over to Yohara for the next slide to talk more about some of our items as we wrap up the webinar.
Thanks, Nimasha. So this slides coming up are actually for our audience members. We have two forms over here. The first one is the evaluation form, which is all about the webinar we had today. So completing this would actually give us an idea about your thoughts on the webinar and any ideas that you may have for future webinars and so on. And then the other form that we have is the form for the e-certificate. So if you could take a few minutes to just fill out that form, we can have your details and send you a certificate of appreciation for your participation. And coming up next, we actually have two more forms. One is for the publications repository launch, and the other one is for the cultural exchange event that's coming up. So both of these are registration forms, and all of these forms will be shared in the chat and hopefully in the follow-up email as well. And this is these are three ways that the audience members and anyone who is interested can get involved with SLAKE. So first, you can become a member, and or you can submit a connection request form, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter, which contains all the information regarding our events and new connection opportunities. You can also follow us on our social media, where you can get updates to not only SLAKE events, but other events in the STEAM field as well. And last but not the least and all, thank you to our guest speakers today. I think it was a very wonderful webinar. Thank you to Dr. Yamina, Dr. Nirodhini, and Dr. Jerry. I'm personally an undergraduate student, but still I had a lot to learn from all of our speakers today. And I think the main point there was to not only focus on the current path that you're in, but then think about the paths that you might have to take in the future, or the decisions you might have to take in the future, and also to be aware of your soft skills, your networking skills, your interpersonal skills, all of this which are going to be really valuable in your career. I think we can wrap up for today. Thank you once again to our speakers and to all our audience members.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure to share my experience. Thank you. This is a great event. Thanks for organizing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.